Jim from Missouri, and I think we'll give Jim a chance to talk. It says here, Jim, that you say if there is a God, he'd be better if he acted like Superman. Can you explain that for us?
Well, yes, it's very simple. In the comics, say Lex Luthor was going to try to take over the world. Do you really think Superman would just let it happen? Or do you think he might say, maybe I ought to try to stop him?
Yeah. I think that in your subtle analogy here, I'm guessing Lex Luthor is sin or the devil or things like that. And in the Bible, it seems that God would have the ability, if he chose, to stop that, whatever it may be, a literal Satan, or, as SR was saying in his prayer, childhood cancer and tsunamis that kills people indiscriminately, all of this evil that happens in the world. Am I reading you right there, Jim?
Yes. Well, another thing is he would not punish people because they didn't like him. A great example would be, here's a great example. Let's say, Superman's running along and there's an afterlife and something happened in Central City, which is where the Flash is. And the people of Central City, they like the Flash better. Can't imagine why. He's only their hero. And Superman's like, what are you going to do? I'm not going to punish him. There. And
this raises an interesting question. This raises an interesting question I wanted to ask SR, and it's pivoting a little bit, but how much of the Bible story is, in a sense, a morality tale similar to comic books, right? We humans, for as long as we've been writing things down, have had these sort of sock puppet morality plays where we have characters we invent and we have them, talk to each other and, I'm going to do this bad thing. Oh, no, you won't, blah, 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 blah. And we do that today in comic book form and in more advanced media like Marvel movies, but it's still the same, good versus evil. SR, I know that you're familiar with the scriptures much more than I am. Wow. What do you think about that sort of observation? How much of the Bible is really a morality tale that's almost comic book like?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic comparison. And I'm not the one that is really touting that. There is a lot of very, very learned scholars out there that are talking about this, and even more so, I think, as more people in that field are hearing these arguments and actually looking at the evidence. Dennis R. MacDonald is definitely somebody I think kind of on the cutting edge of that, especially with the New Testament stuff. The connections that he shows between the Gospels and, older Greek stories that were just, commonplace in the culture, right? It was just a common thing that if you were writing a story at this time in this area of the world, your main character did this with a raven or whatever, like, and yeah, you just see that coming through all the time. And this is why I think I push back so strongly whenever I hear a believer of any stripe make this claim, because I've heard it not just from Christians. I hear it from Muslims. I hear it from Jews, Hindus. I mean, all kinds of different, faiths out there. They'll say, well, gosh, SR, all these people are talking about a God, and they, maybe they don't exactly call it the same thing. They say Yahweh, they say Allah, but it's pretty close. It isn't the fact that all of these cultures that couldn't possibly have talked to each other writing down this stuff, doesn't that indicate that there's something more? And it's like, no, you've jumped over the clearly obvious answer, which is we're all humans. And this is something that is just innate to us as people. We like telling stories. We tell similar stories because at the end of the day, we are really similar. Even if you never meet the person all the way on the other side of the world, or they were alive 3,000 years ago in the same place you are now. There's a lot of similarities. So
yeah, absolutely. I was, as you may know, I have a podcast called the Cross Examiner Podcast. And just yesterday, I interviewed Godless Engineer, who has hosted some shows here. And part of what we talked about was this concept. It's based in sort of the analysis of the mythicism standpoint. Not that I am necessarily a mythicist, but the concept was basically an Occam's razor discussion of, we have all of these stories bubbling around at the same time that these legends are being written for the Christian scripture or the Jewish scripture, and we see similar elements. We see the death and resurrection. We see blessings. We see baptisms. We see all of these, the healing the sick and all of that, and all of these sort of could have multiple explanations. One of them would be, well, this one religion out of all of these dozens at the time is actually true. Or maybe there's a simpler explanation, which is we all enjoy these stories, and this is what was in the publishing zeitgeist of the time when these stories were being created. That you had, as you said, you have to have a raven. Ravens are hot today, so
right. Everybody's got a raven.
I'm not paying attention to you. So
yeah.
What are your thoughts, Jim? We sort of took it in an angle here. Are we on the right track there? Do you think that the comic book heroes definitely are better than the Bible? Are they similar sources? Let's say, sort of similar motivations for these stories.
Well, I think the comic book heroes probably have better morals than any god, because again, they don't just sit on the sidelines, oh, this terrible thing happened, and you just got to say it's my will. No, they say, no, this terrible thing is happening, and we're going to stop. We're going to do everything we can to stop it.
Yeah. And taking a different. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Not only that, if the terrible thing does happen, such as, I forget what issue it was in, but it was during the Imperiex War. And the villain Imperiex destroys Topeka, Kansas. Superman actually feels terrible about it. He's like, all this power, and when they needed me, I failed?
Right.
I must not be that good.
Right. It reminds me of the alternate take. If anybody is familiar with the TV series on Amazon called The Boys, which came from a graphic novel background, it posits superheroes who are much more similar to the Old Testament God than any superhero that we've read, at least I've read before. The superheroes in The Boys, like, it starts out, if you've seen the show, in the first 4 minutes of the show, it sets the tone for what we're dealing with. And in this universe, superheroes are humans. They have emotional and psychological problems. They have egos. They desire things. They get angry, and they are vengeful. And while the show is a symbolically about politics, it is also at a more subtle level symbolically about, in fact, later on, not so symbolically, about religion and what would a god actually be like. I don't know if you've seen the show, SR, but that reminded me wholeheartedly, at least of the Old Testament God that is smiting people and destroying entire villages, as Jim said.
Yeah, and that trend that you mentioned of having that more kind of down to earth, so to speak, connected to that, like, personal, emotional, we all get upset, but not Superman, like, we all get bummed out about things, but not Superman, like that idea of taking these godlike characters, right, throughout our literature and making them in a manner where we do see ourselves so much, right? That's what's happened. For instance, Yahweh a long, long time ago was very distant, right? And very powerful, very big. A lot of the time in the Old Testament, we talk about people meeting God. And what it talks about is, a big thunderstorm, a big tornado on the top of a mountain, this massive fucking event, that is just so overpowering. But then as we get further on in that story, and we get to the time of Jesus Christ, for instance, he's very up close and personal with people, right? He's very getting in people's faces, rubbing their eyes with mud in his own spit. I mean, literally spitting on people. That's how close he is to these people, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's something to it. There's something to that trope that kind of makes us like those type of characters a little bit more. When we have that ability to see that they're different from us in a lot of these capacities, but I can still look at them and go like, yeah, I get that, man. Yeah, I get why you do that. Even if it's a god, we still need that because that's who we are as people. That's just a human trait. Right. It's not because we all have some magic, spirit inside of us or anything. Right. It's just because that's the way that evolution, has our brain, functioning currently.
Yeah, nothing in the Old Testament God is extra human, is outside of humanity. Exactly. He's very human God. He's wrathful and mad and maybe a little bipolar. But yeah, well, thank you so much, Jim, for that call. I really appreciate it.
Well, I'd like to add two more things why I think God would be better if he acted like Superman. One, we wouldn't have to worship him. He just, if something terrible's happened, he'd just intercede, whether we liked him or not. We could hate his guts, and he'd say, well, I must not be doing a good job. And even if they don't want to worship me, that's fine. I'm just here to help. Sure. And the other thing is when I was talking about, the Flash, it's the idea of he would allow other gods as kind of a counterweight.
Sure.
One of the arguments I've heard of, one of the arguments I hear when I say God should act like Superman is they say, what about free will? One of the things I always counter with is
that is go ahead. But that's we have other callers waiting.
Let me finish my thought.
Well, hold on a second.
I'm sorry. I don't want to.
Yeah.
But,
so we have other callers.
That
I'm going to mute you. Hold on a second. We do have other callers waiting, and I do want to get to them. So go ahead and finish your point about free will, and we can talk about that. But we do have to move on. So go ahead, Jim. One last thought.
Well, one of the things that Superman did was he gave Batman kryptonite in order to say, just in case I go crazy, you can try to stop me.
Yeah, that is true. That is very true. So thank you for that point. I really appreciate it. As our last thoughts there, I do agree with everything Jim said, that we can easily, as humans, individual humans. So these comic books are written by humans. They're not written by a committee or a divine being that we know of. We can easily imagine super powerful beings that are more moral than the God that is in the Bible. We can improve the 10 commandments by taking out the 2 of the 3 I am a jealous God commandments and replacing them with don't own people as property and don't wage wars of extermination. And we as simple humans have made it almost infinitely more moral set of laws. So what are your thoughts there on, because the counter argument would be Superman's only good because humans are writing him that way, right? Right. And the divine command theorists amongst Christians are like, well, sometimes God does bad things, and that's good because we don't know everything God knows. Yeah. So these paltry humans that are writing the Superman comic book just assume that they know better than God, and if they're portraying God as Superman, right? And that opens a whole can of worms. Right. I think the argument that we're fallible, we're finite as people, and therefore we can't understand these seemingly bad actions in our perception because we don't have, the literal God's eye view. I think that is actually a problem for the believer. If you believe in this type of God and you say that as an argument, you have to recognize that you have completely lost the ability to pass judgment calls on anything. And you doing so goes against the infallibility of the God that you believe in. You have put yourself in a place where you are saying you are on par with the mind of God. If you go outside
and your child gets run over by a car, you can do nothing. You have no ability to be thankful or sad at this moment, because God's plan may not yet be fully revealed to you.
Right.
So truly, you have handcuffed yourself in this argument. Like, if you want to be on shakier moral footing, I don't know how to do it just yet, because it is a terrible, terrible argument. Yeah. That being said, I do think it is completely possible for all of us to very easily come up with a version of a God that is better than the one in the Bible. And what I mean by that is not simply, oh, I can just whole cloth manufacture something from my own imagination. No, I can take from the characteristics presented in the Bible of what this God should be.
Right.
And still make a better version of the God, because the God in the Bible is inconsistent based on its own standards. The God in the Bible does bad things according to it, not me. I'm not bad, because I hate that. How do you judge God? You non-believing atheist, blah blah blah. It's like, I'm not. God is. God said, don't do this, but it's cool if I do it. See, that's the problem. That's an immoral thing. So yeah, totally possible.
Yeah, it goes back to your answer to the question of the week of the prayer that you would say, your grace. That's right. Thank you for not bashing my head against a rock as a child, which is what God ordered people to do.